Today on the Divided States of America show, Kevin McCarty and the GOP's commitment to America. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Divided States of America show, where your host, Marlon Gardenera, takes on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We'll sort through the best and worst of politics and culture, asking questions and looking for answers that our two-ring, two-party circus has failed to provide. And here is your host, Marlon Gardenera.
Welcome back to the Divided States of America show, folks. We're here noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, weekdays on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You can watch the previous 51 episodes on demand or catch us live Monday through Friday. We appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate your feedback. You can always reach me at host@thedsashow.com. The most lively and interactive place to show up to discuss the most divisive issues in our divided nation is definitely Facebook, facebook.com/The DSA Show. From time to time, we get 1,000 plus, 1,500 plus comments. Lots of you chiming in on the questions we like to ask to get us talking about how we close the divide in America. It's very clear we are divided. It's very clear people take sides on just about every issue. The goal of this show is to have thoughtful, respectful conversations to bring us closer together. I believe both sides continue to fail, asking for everything and really accepting nothing because they don't work together to give what Americans are asking for. They sort of just work to their own audience. And again, I don't think that's working at all. So today, let's get right into it. Kevin McCarty put out his commitment to America, very similar to Newt Gingrich's contract with America back in the mid-'90s when Bill Clinton was in the White House. I thought it was a good idea then. I've read at least the outline plan of the commitment to America, and I want to go over that with you today. But before we do, let's take a look at what Kevin McCarty thinks of his plan.
You and your family go shopping, you probably ask yourself, can we afford this? Now more than ever, Americans are struggling just to get by, wondering if they could even make it. You know what's even worse? The country's struggle goes beyond just the grocery store. Violent crime is at record highs in our streets and neighborhoods. The border has become a national security crisis, with fentanyl killing our fellow citizens. Soaring inflation has shrunk paychecks and sent us into a recession. And our kids have fallen further behind thanks to school closures and lockdowns. The White House and the Democrat majority in Congress control Washington. They're in charge. This is their record. And yet, they want you to give them 2 more years of power. But Republicans have a plan for a new direction, one that'll get our country back on track. It's called the Commitment to America, a plan for an economy that's strong, where you can feed your family and fill up your tank, a nation that's safe, where communities are protected by the police and criminals are prosecuted, a future that's built on freedom, where your children come first and are taught to dream big, and a government that's accountable, where politicians don't get special treatment. We simply cannot afford 2 more years of business as usual in Washington. We need common sense change now. If you agree, join us and tens of millions more across this great country. Because people like you, who work hard, play by the rules, deserve better.
That's Kevin McCarthy's commitment to America. I want to take a look today because it is the plan, at least as outlined, if the Republicans are to take over the House and Kevin McCarthy, the presumable House Speaker, were in place. Among other things, these are the plans that they've laid out for America. I want to go over them. They're not too long, not too detailed, give you a quick take, give you something to think about as you consider who you're voting for in this year's midterms. Up first, the economy. What they want is an economy that's strong. That's how they describe it. First up, fight inflation and lower the cost of living. First action item, curb wasteful government spending that's raising the price of groceries, gas, cars, housing, and growing our national debt. Now, my natural question would be, who has a problem with any of that? I guess the next question would be, I don't know that I trust either side to actually try to cut wasteful government spending if the spending is going to the districts of the representatives who got the money for their areas. One might think it's wasteful in another area and very useful in their own. But I've never met a politician that was so frugal as to cut off their own nose to spite their face and make change with their spending in their area if they thought that would help them get actual votes. But in principle and in theory, and where we should be able to find consensus on both sides of the aisle, is wasteful government spending, because we know it exists. There's always the rumor when Republicans are in control, the defense spending and the number of contracts and jobs, whether they get used in a very specific instance, or what the cost is, or what the average pay is of the people in that industry. The industry grows when there's a Republican in control. Likewise, when Democrats are in control, social services, nonprofits, the groups that are trying to help people with less. It really is a picture of using dollars to serve your audience, which again is what politicians do. On the Divided States of America show, what I'd like them to be doing is working on the priorities together, itemizing, deciding, and cutting spending from both sides, particularly as it lists the wasteful spending. Growing the national debt, I always find that humorous. Whoever has the credit card is more than happy to use it. When balanced budgets are opportunities in front of us, there always seems to be a reason, an excuse, something that comes up that keeps it from actually happening. I don't want to play left or right or the tit for tat at who does a better job overall. I know that there are advantages and disadvantages to both sides. You already know how I feel. I wish there were a third party, a third entity, an independent group who could take the sting out of what the far left wants and out of what the far right wants. But I don't think that anybody has a problem curbing wasteful spending. What I have a problem with is how they couldn't get that done with Trump in the White House, and how they can't seem to get it done with Biden in the White House, and how that promise, whether it comes from Democrats or Republicans, is something that actually might be true at any part in our lives. Now, as they try to relate it to inflation, do they believe that wasteful government spending is the reason for it? And the dollars that went out into the economy, do they believe that it went purely to Democrats? Are they concerned about the Republicans who received the same dollars, or the Republican programs that were funded? The questions are deeper than that. And it is a sad commentary on what it takes to convince the American people of just about anything. You can't see it in the background. If I added my split screen, maybe you can see it now. Hold on, let me see if I can put them both up there. In the background, you'll notice up at the top, I always have Fox News on the right when I'm talking about Republican issues, because I'm always interested in the latest headlines. The headline currently is Vladimir Putin grants full Russian citizenship to the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. Seems like just a straightforward news report, but as I go down, the same would happen if I was on CNN or MSNBC, or the same typically happens. The bias and what almost feels like Russian propaganda, where they're trying to create a narrative before you even read the story. It's evident there, but that's not the point. I do try to stay as balanced and give as much information as I can. In doing that, when I question the commitment to America, I'm looking for the parts that are a consensus. So again, curbing wasteful spending and which is, they believe, raising the price of groceries, gas, and housing, and growing our national debt, is not something I believe more from one side than I do from the other. They both have their own interests in what raises our debt and what they think spending should be on, what their priorities are. Next up, under the fight inflation and lower the cost of living, increase take-home pay, creating good-paying jobs and bringing stability to the economy through pro-growth tax and deregulatory policies. Now, I don't know what their strategy is for increasing take-home pay. I don't recall their attitude towards it, with the exception of the military. I always feel like Republicans in general have it is stereotypical to believe that their support for the military, and whether it's symbolism or real, giving raises to the military is something that you can hope for and count on from the Republican Party. I appreciate that. Now, raising take-home pay in general, you often hear that they're pro-business. I don't often hear the movement on wages. I don't often hear the campaign promises on wages. So this one was somewhat new to me, not to say that it doesn't exist, but it was something new to me, at least in terms of the backup that you typically get from Republicans on better take-home pay. Now, creating good-paying jobs. I do believe that they would like things made in America. I do believe they would like to manufacture more in America. Now, we saw the same thing with the Trump family, with the MAGA hats made in China, with Ivanka Trump's items being made in other countries. It goes on and on about the rhetoric about what people want, but I'm so conditioned to hear politicians, or people, even if they say they're not politicians, but they talk like politicians, say what they would like to see happen, but then live or do something entirely different. And I believe that goes for most Americans as well. If you go into the average home of someone who thinks they're a patriot and wants to buy American, they have as many products from China as the average person. I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but most of it is just rhetoric. Now, the idea of good paying jobs, we're all for it. The idea of creating more jobs here in America, by all means, nobody has a problem with that. But the stability to the economy through pro-growth tax and deregulatory policies, okay, I'm not against lowering taxes. I'm not against pro-growth taxation, where we give benefits to people who are going to create more jobs, create more opportunities, and quite frankly, they create additional tax revenue when people do have more money flowing through the economy and as income and being spent as income for even the businesses. But deregulatory policies, I always question it. I always think for every regulation, there's a reason it should be there, and quite frankly, there's probably a reason it shouldn't. But the compromise or the understanding in the middle between the two is often lost by the party that's in power, and then the people who suffered from the lack of regulation go back to suffering. The people who think they suffered because of regulation, and that typically means they don't make as much money, and they may have made money at the expense of someone, which is why regulations were put in place. It all still goes back to the idea that I don't trust either side to carry out what's best for most people, but because they're not talking, we don't make much progress on anything. Having said that, make American energy independent and reduce gas prices. Their checklist item to do that is to maximize production of reliable, cleaner American-made energy and cut the permitting process time in half to reduce the reliance on foreign countries, also prevent rolling blackouts, and lower the cost of gas and utilities. All right, I've talked about the transition, the issues with climate change. I wouldn't be shocked if for the first time in the history of politics, someone promised something and there was a short-term gain and they don't outline what the long-term impact of that would be. Climate change and the idea of making production more reliable and making energy more accessible by cutting permitting time in half and reducing the reliance on foreign countries. Listen, oil companies don't mind buying oil from foreign countries if it's cheaper than it is producing it here. I think we sometimes take out the real incentive involved in oil production, distribution. I think we take out the fact that it's a for-profit business. It's not our government who buys it and redistributes it, and our government is buying it at a high price. Our government, too, doesn't mind buying it from foreign countries if, in fact, they are buying it cheaper. Likewise, if we can sell it for more, if we can sell it from our reserves, which we do annually, there are so many ways and there are so many factors involved that it is misleading to make it seem as if a Democrat changes the landscape entirely. It's not the case, but I did see the word cleaner, American-made energy. I don't see the push from the Republican side, from the right on cleaner energies. Obviously, investments in some of the oil companies are in many cases leading the way. They understand that we're going to transition, whether the right or the left or the middle or anybody involved likes it or not. There are obvious reasons that we need to. The impacts of climate change, the impacts on heat waves, the impacts on flooding. Things scientists are saying are a reality for us can't be ignored. Now, they certainly can be ignored in a short-term political perspective, but everybody would like more reliable production. Everyone would like cleaner American-made energy. Everyone forgets, or at least a lot of people forget, that American companies prefer what's cheaper. Oil independence isn't the only goal of American oil production companies. Their profit is a greater incentive, and the idea of oil independence is something that comes and goes based on the market prices, the market values, supply and demand, but to make it seem like it's purely a government issue is sort of misleading. Permitting time, there are typically reasons relating to the permits. I don't mind reductions in that. Again, why can't they be working together to do it? Now, the idea of preventing rolling blackouts. Listen, they'd like to make that a political issue. Every time someone says California and rolling blackouts, someone else says Texas, and they can't keep their people warm, and they have their own independent energy systems. Politicians aren't the best people to make anything happen. I certainly question California energy companies who have no problem raising the prices. I just heard a report just recently, 25% of the price has nothing to do with the production of oil or the production of the energy that could contribute to rolling blackouts, and that the poor share and sort of an inordinate burden. If everybody pays $25 means something more to someone who makes far less money than it does to a millionaire. So that debate will go on, that debate will happen. But in principle, no one has a problem with American-made energy, more reliable or cleaner, or even the reliance on foreign countries who can manipulate prices based on their supply and demand. Our reliance on Saudi Arabia isn't a good thing. But we just can't take out the fact that oil companies are in it for a profit, and they play a role in what the ultimate price is for oil. And if you think, let's just say Republicans are pro-oil, what role do they play in impacting the prices in America, if any? Or if they step out and step back and let the free market take its place, what role are they going to be able to have to stabilize things? Now, one would say, if you get rid of regulation, if you get rid of the time it takes to produce oil, great, oil companies find it easier, but that doesn't mean they pass on the savings to us. We know even through the pandemic with the crazy oil and gas prices, oil and gas companies were making record profits. So, I understand inflation. I understand supply and demand. I understand it's harder to get oil distributed around the world without Russian oil and oil-based products being distributed the same. But the company's profits went up, so it's not as if they passed on the prices directly. They only bumped up inflation to cover the additional cost. We leave that out, and I think it's misleading. But I don't have a problem with any of these, obviously, in principle. And then they're next up for the economy and making it stronger is strengthen the supply chain and end dependence on China. Move supply chains away from China, expand U.S. manufacturing, and enhance American economic competitiveness and cyber resiliency. Okay, no problem. But when the former president has products that he has no problem touting from China, these are campaign slogans. These aren't real things. When we talked about U.S. manufacturing increasing in America, many times over, and the percentage being so great, well, the rules for what manufacturing are changed. It used to be a far greater number of people actually manufacturing something. I believe the Trump administration moved it down to 3 or more people manufacturing something. So the growth of manufacturing automatically is going to change just by virtue of changing the definition of it. Don't get me wrong, the Democrats are trying to redefine what a recession is. So we understand politicians play these games. But in principle, moving supply chains to America is great, but Americans like cheaper products. Americans wouldn't buy American if it meant in every case they were going to be creating their own personal inflation just to buy American. How do we know that? Because in many cases, people have choices to buy American products now. They're more expensive, but when given the opportunity, they buy Chinese. It's really that simple. The market has decided how it actually wants to respond to that. But from a political promise perspective, that is a great one. We know it actually works. Next up, a nation that's safe is something that's a part of the commitment to America. Secure the border and combat illegal immigration. Fully fund effective border enforcement strategies, infrastructure, and advanced technologies to prevent illegal crossings and trafficking by cartels. All in, 100%. I'm with you. I would have believed it more if when you were in power, that would have been more important than just the wall. Not to say that that's the only effort that was made. Certainly Trump tried to do something about asylum using COVID and the pandemic restrictions to keep people out of America. But it's not as if they changed the asylum system. It's not as if they changed the Constitution or the international treaties that allow for asylum in America. So when the pandemic wasn't the basis of it, or even the next president came into office, it's not like there were established policies and things that were put in place to make any of the changes they're talking about. So I always say this. Both parties would like to see the other side fail. And oftentimes it appears as if rather than contributing something valuable, rather than doing something to help more Americans, they would just watch on the sideline for the other party to fail instead of both of them fully funding effective border enforcement strategies, infrastructure, and invents technologies to prevent illegal crossings and trafficking by cartels, as if someone is against that. I don't know who it is. I always ask the question as people say the border's open, did the Border Patrol leave? Did Homeland Security stop doing their job? I don't think either is the case. But again, when you receive political information, the gullibility level is overwhelming. People don't have time to research it. People don't have time to get a better picture of what's going on. So they accept the stuff that's given to them, and it's always, or not always, it's so often missing so much information that the gullible take it and crazy things happen. Now, I have to remind you, you're listening to the Divided States of America show. We are here weekdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We encourage you to watch. We encourage you to comment. Certainly go to our Facebook group, facebook.com/The DSA Show. It's the most lively debate that happens. Now, next one up. In making sure that the nation's safe and the commitment to America, just recently released by Kevin McCarthy on behalf of the GOP, with a presumption if the House takes over, if the GOP takes over the House, Kevin McCarthy would be the Speaker. In keeping the nation safe, their next checklist item is end catch and release loopholes, require legal status to get a job, and eliminate welfare incentives. Check, check, and check. For it all. Literally, for it all. Now, my understanding is that welfare, as we knew it before the contract with America, Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, was already changed and the rights went to the state. Now, if someone is seeking asylum, that's different. If someone is an illegal immigrant, I didn't believe that they were eligible for that to begin with. I do understand that they can get health care because we're humans and we take care of other humans. And if their kids are here, we don't check the status because we don't expect them to be here uneducated. We don't know how long they'll be here. We don't know if they'll be here for 20 years. The idea that from a humanitarian standpoint, we wouldn't educate any child that's here, I think we're past that. And I don't know that Republicans are proposing that. But the catch and release loopholes, come on. Who disagrees? But where is that fight and that appeal and that pitch to all Americans, not just your party, year round? Next one up, reduce crime and protect public safety. Support 200,000 more police officers through recruiting bonuses and oppose all efforts to defund the police. Okay, no problem. I remember the number 100,000 police officers floated out there before. I don't know if we got there. I don't know if the qualifications were met. I don't know the quality of policing as a result of these campaign promises. We do need more police, but better trained to deal with the calls, with the needs of the public. An officer with a drawn gun with an unarmed person with a mental illness, certainly there are occasions where it has to happen for the safety of the officer and for the safety of others, but we're seeing more and more around our nation, the calls and the needs are shifting in many cases to mental health needs. And police stations and police departments around the country are also trying to recognize that. So defunding the police, I know it was blown out of proportion as if we just want to take money from police and act as if that's the end of the equation. The other half of the equation was to make sure that we were using the funding to help people with the problems that the police are often encountering. If every call in the old days, if 9 out of 10 calls was a criminal activity with criminal behavior on weapons, and they required pure law enforcement to control the situation, provide for the safety, the funding should represent that. If it's now 6 out of 10 and 4 out of 10 are mental health calls, and police officers with a lack of mental health training aren't needed, and more mental health professionals, or even better, more police officers with de-escalation training and mental health training and mental health qualifications are there, that's where the funding should go. But again, the gullibility of the average person listening to what we need, why we need it, and talking about who's against it and blowing that out of proportion is what makes the divide in America so ridiculous. But I don't know who has a problem with more police, other than people who think their areas are over-policed, other than people who think they've been abused by police. So if you have more police officers, we also need to carry out and protect from the concerns we've always had about police officers in some communities. But both can exist at the same time. We can get more police officers. Check, all for it. Recruiting bonuses? Great. We need good people willing to do it with higher standards, more accountability, better training to better equip them to do their jobs. And if their job is more mental health, the funding should be aligned with that so that we're not spending our money for a responsive force that isn't prepared to deal with the responses. police officers will tell you they're not always prepared to go out on mental health calls. Let's let our services reflect the needs of the people who, quite frankly, are paying for them through their taxes. But we can agree more police officers, recruiting bonuses, and oppose all efforts to defund police? Sure, but I don't oppose efforts to fund the needs of the people too. Again, both can happen at the same time. Next up, crack down on prosecutors and district attorneys who refuse to prosecute crimes while permanently criminalizing all forms of illicit fentanyl. I think that one requires a little bit more information about who gets prosecuted, who doesn't. We know prosecutors like to prosecute people where they have enough evidence to get a conviction, but I think that one requires a little bit more. I think they're insinuating things that are easy to paint a picture as if there are prosecutors that just let people go. But I would say it's just as easy to paint pictures where one person can commit a crime and another person can commit the very same crime, but the outcomes, the sentencing, how everything is handled could be entirely different too. And if we wanted to, I suppose we could line that up with party line issues. But again, I'm going to leave that one. In general, sure, we want people to prosecute more criminals, no question. And criminalizing all forms of illicit fentanyl, no problem. But I would have said that about opioids, and I would say I would like to have seen as many people related to opioids in jail as people felt comfortable with crackheads smoking crack in the streets in jail. It's two different systems, two different customers, same or very similar outcomes in terms of the impact on people using the drugs, but the number of people jailed and the impact on families and communities, entirely different. So the balance that would be needed when you consider criminalizing all forms of illicit fentanyl, sure, but a more broader picture of more benefit to more Americans would be better too. And I'd be curious to see if their campaign promises will expand to more of that, or again, is it just what politicians typically do from the left and right and just say what your particular audience wants to hear. Next up on A Nation That's Safe in the Commitment to America. Defend America's national security. Support our troops, invest in efficient, effective military, establish a select committee on China, and exercise peace through strength with our allies to counter increasing global threats. While the idea of exercising peace through strength with our allies isn't something the last Republican administration promised, so I would certainly take it from the Republican Party should they take over the House and or Senate in this year's midterm elections. So supporting the troops, investing in efficient, effective military, even establishing a select committee on China, no problem with any of the above. Sounds like a plan. Next up, the future that's built on freedom. Make sure every student can succeed and give a parent a voice. Advance the Parents' Bill of Rights. Recover lost learning from our school closures. Expand parental choice so over 1 million more students can receive the education their parents know is best. That's an interesting one. Also one for another show. Parents deciding that they don't want something for their kid affecting every kid is a question mark for me. I understand the limits on what you want for your child, and I even understand rallying a community and getting and garnering more support and having boards represent the people, and I am completely for that. But we have seen the takeover of school boards and the education process by non-educators who aren't equipped to assess what goes in. They certainly are equipped to what goes into their children and what the outcomes are for their children. But that used to be a collaboration. And now it's a political football that gets thrown around for the sake of playing the game and not as much for educating. So you hear, the advance the Parents' Bill of Rights. Parents always have a choice of where they take their kids to school. And they can take them to private schools. And I've never had a problem with more choice, ever. And I see the prevalence of charter schools where I live and them having very specific missions and focuses and them having different approaches to educating children. What I do have is that a minority of parents dictating the terms to everyone else, and book bans in particular, because you don't want your child to read a book that might include someone that's not like you. When the bans are just discrimination, when the bans are just racist or bigotry or homophobia, I don't support them. And just because you're a parent, I don't support sanctioned discrimination either. Period. Now, in a future that builds on freedom and the commitment to America, defend fairness by ensuring that only women can compete in women's sports. Another issue that I want to explore in depth. I think they're taking an easy swipe at it. I don't know enough about it. I have questions about it. I need to educate myself and get a better understanding of why it makes sense for someone born a male who's transitioning to female, whether through operation, through hormones, or whatever the case may be. I need to get a better understanding of why it is important that an identity compete against the physical attributes or gender, or what the ratio or quota or levels of hormones or factors are in that competition that create a disadvantage by origin, by their natural genetic makeup. I don't have the answers. I don't have a strong enough opinion on it because I don't have enough education on it. But I know Republicans take that swipe, and I know they are willing to exclude or eliminate a lot of thoughts and possibilities. I wonder what they do when the person is a family member. I wonder what happens when it's more personal. But that's something that I think needs to be explored at a much greater level so that I get a better understanding and can even explain it at a better level. But again, under the future that built on American freedom and the commitment to America, recently announced by Kevin McCarty and the GOP, achieve longer, healthier lives for Americans. And it says personalized care to provide affordable options and better quality delivered by trusted doctors. I'm just going to say to the GOP right now, I don't trust you. You shouldn't trust yourself. You've had so long to come up with an alternative to Obamacare that I think it's laughable that you want to have a credible voice in this subject. You talked about getting rid of it. You talked about improving it. You've talked about so many things without delivering on anything. In this particular area, it's why I went from being a conservative Republican, remember I was a conservative talk radio host, to being a centrist, because I laughed at the idea that people didn't like Obamacare and Affordable Care Act. And the laughter wasn't about their dislike for it. The laughter was that there were probably a list of things that could have been done and should have been done to make it better. But the idea of trying to repeal it 30, 40, 50 times with no success, the idea that there's an alternative plan without ever hearing it, the idea that to this day I still don't know what they would want to do is absurd. So on this particular subject, I don't know that there's any credibility to me. There may be credibility to you because you believe them in other aspects and areas. I'd be interested in hearing your feedback on what you think or what you know about the GOP's plan as it relates to healthcare. Under that same heading, achieve longer, healthier lives for Americans, they have lower prices through transparency, choice, and competition, invest in life-saving cures, and improve access to telemedicine. Okay, those are all great, but if you don't have improved access to medicine, you're not going to get any of them. So again, it's just an extension of something that is incredible by virtue of their record, both when they're in power, their lack of plan, whether they're in power or out of power, and the lack of credibility that presents to someone like me, who has a list of pre-existing conditions, watching them try to break even the idea of pre-existing conditions being covered through the Affordable Care Act. I just don't trust them. I don't know that they care, and I don't know because I don't remember receiving information. And as I said earlier, if you look on my screen in the background, it's Fox News. I search for healthcare there to see what their version of what would happen for America would be, and I don't often see it. Next up, confront big tech and demand fairness. Provide greater privacy and data security protections. Equip parents with more tools to keep their kids safe online, and stop companies from putting politics ahead of people. Well, to that I say one thing. If the Republican Party were a company, I would say that there isn't very much fairness for Democrats. So the idea that you need to control fairness in big tech or fairness in private companies, it's pretty laughable to me, and I would say this to both parties. It's a private business. Don't use it. It's a private business. Don't use it. Create your own. I don't think Truth Social is trying to be fair to everyone. They certainly have a platform and they leave it open and you can do what you want. But there's a predominance of people that are there for a reason. They like the messages that are given there. So I'm always tentative when the government's trying to get involved in technology or in business so that they don't take a beating from one side. Get out of that. If you don't want to take a beating, put out a better product yourself that people don't want to fight against. That goes for both parties. But the idea that you're going to create fairness in social media, and then at the same time you want Twitter to make sure that they provide openness to one person and you want to control what they do or can't do? Come on, is that the business that you really think you should be in? Under the heading freedom? Under the heading freedom, you think you should tell businesses who they have to support, who they have to get behind, who they have to do the bidding for? Are you telling Fox News they need to do a better job for Democrats? Is someone telling CNN they need to do a better job for Republicans? Stay out of that lane. If there are very specific issues related to privacy and data security, I can be there. But the fairness from you, I don't know that you or the other political party fall under the category of fair for a majority of Americans. And if it is, it's a slight one where the other side is very clear on how they feel about your role in their lives. And lastly, a government that's accountable, which in principle, we all should be for. Preserve our constitutional freedoms. Uphold free speech, unless it's a big tech company. Protect the lives of the unborn children, unless they're rape or get incest because the political wind shifted and you now think there needs to be exceptions, although I don't understand that. If you're pro-life and you think it's murder, why do you need any exceptions? Stand tall, stand firm, unless this is a version of moderation. But if it's a version of moderation, protect the lives of unborn children, flies in the face of it. There are so many mixed messages. I understand the litmus test for many a little further on the spectrum on the right, and abortion being one of them, and the need to be pro-life. You know I'm pro-life. You also know I'm pro-minding my business and not putting my religious beliefs, which are the basis of me being pro-life, on other people. You may not share my religion. You certainly don't have to share my views, and I'm not trying to demand that you do. But uphold free speech? Sure. But I think you only mean that if it benefits you. Protect the lives of unborn children, unless it's politically incorrect for you and you need to make exceptions so that you don't, make people you need, make women, quite frankly, mad at you for not being more considerate of their rights. Guarantee religious freedom. Sure, just don't want my religion in my politics. And safeguard the Second Amendment. No problem. As long as the Second Amendment still allows for the regulation, well-regulated aspect of the Second Amendment. Because again, I can't go buy grenades and neither can you, and there's a reason, and I think that reason should stay. Hold Washington accountable. Don't know that a political party can say that and think that they want us to take them serious. Conduct rigorous oversight to rein in government abuse of power and corruption. I don't know that you're trying to rein in January 6th, so I don't know that you're completely, credible on the idea of Washington accountability, because there were people who tried to use a fake slate of electors. There were people who voted to allow that to happen, and I don't know that you are being held accountable for doing that. So this, like healthcare, are one of those areas where you're talking and you keep saying the word transparency, but I don't know that that's something that I really, really understand. And require the White House to answer for its incompetence at home and abroad. I think there are people who question Trump's incompetence, and I don't know that you tend to be one of them. So again, neither party could really say they want to hold Washington accountable, because that would require that they hold themselves accountable. And then restore the people's voice. End special treatment for members of Congress by repealing proxy voting, and increase accountability in elections process through voter ID, accurate voter rolls, and observer access. I'll say this about the Republicans. There's always been a side who had no problem suppressing the vote. I believe that. There's always been a side who put in rules who they knew would immediately impact people. Old folks with lack of transportation may find a difficult time getting their ID, may find a difficult time getting their ID in time to get to an election, find it troublesome to get to the election. Because 60 courtrooms threw out cases or didn't believe cases of mass voter fraud, and because many secretaries of state, even in Republican states, said it was one of the safer elections in history. I don't trust the Republican Party on voting. I'll just say it. I think they'd like to make it difficult. I think that they allow lines in areas where there's going to be a high turnout because people don't want to wait. I think they don't want mail-in voting because they know people with jobs where they require their hourly wage, and losing any hours requires their ability to put food on the table and pay rent. I think they don't want those people voting. I don't trust them. I just don't. And American history will outline how one side has always tried to keep the other, and typically the minorities or poorer folks, from getting to the polls. I just flat out don't trust them. What I'd like to see in America is an effort to make sure all Americans vote, to make sure more Americans vote, to make the process easier. And don't spend your time trying to figure out political strategies to keep them from voting. Put all of your effort to make sure everyone gets a vote, and we do a better job of protecting from any fraud, which, quite frankly, I think we're doing a pretty good job of right now, because, as I said, many secretaries of state, even from Republican states, believe we're already doing it. So, quick take on the commitment to America. Kevin McCarty and the GOP put it out recently. I agree with much of it. I disagree with the credibility of some of it, but I believe all of it would be better if both parties were working together, and or if there was a third party that was the final arbiter because neither side had enough votes to make anything happen. So you know I'm an advocate. I'm going to keep exploring this idea. I'm going to keep exploring the good things from the Commitment to America. I'll keep questioning the things that don't make sense. I'm going to do that weekdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to do it on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I ask that you subscribe to YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like our page on Facebook. By all means, put your comments. The best place so far is facebook.com/the DSA show. But do what you can as you try to have thoughtful, respectful conversations to help close the divide, because it's real, it's big, and it's not useful. America has not been, or is not, or will not be better off with one party in control as long as they do things for the benefit of their group and not the majority of Americans. Again, you're listening to the Divided States of America show. It's been my pleasure to spend another afternoon with you, sharing how I hope we can have better, more important discussions on how these things affect all our lives. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching the Divided States of America show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel and share this video with your family and friends.